Hello, and welcome to watch another video where we explore the history and myths of the world. Take a seat, lean back, and enjoy the video. The North Atlantic Ocean keeps many secrets beneath its cold, dark waters. But none is more haunting than the remains of a ship that captured the world's imagination. For more than a century, one name has stood above all others: Titanic. A ship built to represent the very best of human achievement, yet remembered for one of history's greatest tragedies. On the night of April 14th, 1912, the largest passenger ship ever built sailed confidently through calm waters beneath a sky filled with stars. Less than 3 hours later, she would disappear beneath the freezing Atlantic. More than 1,500 people would lose their lives. The disaster would shock the world and forever change the way ships were designed and operated. But this story did not begin with an iceberg. It began years earlier, in boardrooms, shipyards, and in the minds of men who dreamed of building the greatest ship the world had ever seen. To understand why Titanic sank, we must first understand why she was built. The year was 1900. The Atlantic Ocean had become the busiest highway on Earth. Every week, thousands of passengers crossed between Europe and North America. Some traveled in luxury. Others carried little more than hope, hoping to build a better life in America. Shipping companies competed fiercely for these passengers. Bigger ships meant greater prestige. Faster crossings meant more business. Winning the Atlantic meant winning the future. One company dominated the headlines: Cunard Line. Their magnificent ships, Lusitania and Mauretania, were the fastest in the world. They shattered speed records and became symbols of British engineering. Their success placed enormous pressure on a rival company, White Star Line. Rather than chasing speed, White Star decided to pursue something even more ambitious. In 1907, White Star Line Chairman J. Bruce Ismay met with Lord Peary, head of the famous Harland and Wolff shipyard. During their meeting, an extraordinary idea was born. If they couldn't build the fastest ships, they would build the largest, the most luxurious, the safest. Ships so impressive that passengers would choose comfort over speed. The result would be 3 magnificent sister ships: Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. Titanic was designed to feel less like a ship and more like the world's finest hotel. First-class passengers would enjoy elegant dining rooms, electric elevators, a swimming pool, a squash court, luxurious lounges, and the famous grand staircase, decorated with carved oak, wrought iron, and an enormous glass dome. Every detail reflected the confidence of an age that believed technology could conquer nature itself. Construction began at Harland and Wolff's enormous shipyard in Belfast. More than 3,000 men worked tirelessly to build the giant. Every steel plate, every rivet, every beam was placed largely by hand. The work was dangerous. High above the ground, workers balanced on narrow platforms while red-hot rivets flew through the air. Accidents were common. Several workers died before Titanic ever touched the water. It was a reminder that even mankind's greatest achievements often came at a terrible cost. When completed, Titanic stretched more than 880 feet from bow to stern. She stood 11 stories tall, weighed over 46,000 tons, and contained enough machinery to power an entire town. Deep below her decks, 29 enormous boilers generated steam for 2 massive engines and a powerful central turbine. Together, they drove 3 gigantic propellers that pushed the ship across the Atlantic at over 21 knots. Titanic's greatest innovation was hidden beneath her decks. 16 watertight compartments divided the hull. If one compartment flooded, massive steel doors could seal it off automatically. Engineers believed the ship could remain afloat even after serious damage. Newspapers praised this remarkable design. Soon, stories spread across Britain and America that Titanic was virtually unsinkable. Although White Star Line never officially claimed the ship could never sink, the myth had already taken on a life of its own. On May 31st, 1911, more than 100,000 spectators gathered to witness history. As the supports were removed, the enormous hull slowly began to move. Weighing more than 26,000 tons, Titanic slid gracefully into the river Lagan. The crowd erupted in applause. Years of planning, thousands of workers, and millions of dollars had produced the largest moving object humanity had ever created. By the spring of 1912, Titanic was finally ready. Soon, she would embark on her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York. On board would be millionaires, immigrants, crew members, families, and dreamers. None of them knew that within days, their journey would become one of the most unforgettable stories ever told. It was the morning of April 10th, 1912. Southampton Harbor was alive with excitement. Dock workers hurried across the piers while crowds gathered to witness a ship unlike any the world had ever seen. Towering above every nearby building, the Titanic dominated the skyline. For many, seeing her in person was almost unbelievable. She was not simply another ocean liner. She was a symbol of modern engineering, a floating city preparing to cross the Atlantic. More than 2,000 people prepared aboard. They came from different countries, different cultures, and very different walks of life. Some were among the wealthiest people on Earth. Others had spent their entire life savings for a third-class ticket, hoping to begin a new life in America. They all shared one thing in common. None of them knew that this journey would change history forever. Standing on the bridge was one of Britain's most respected sea captains, Captain Edward John Smith. After nearly 40 years at sea, he had earned the trust of passengers and crew alike. Many wealthy travelers booked voyages specifically because he was in command. Titanic was expected to be his final voyage before retirement, a fitting farewell aboard the greatest ship of his career. Fate, however, had other plans. While passengers admired the luxurious interiors, more than 900 crew members worked tirelessly behind scenes. Deep inside the ship, firemen shoveled tons of coal into enormous boilers. The heat in the boiler rooms could exceed 40 degrees Celsius, making it one of the hardest jobs aboard. Engineers monitored powerful engines that kept the massive liner moving. Stewards prepared elegant cabins. Chefs cooked thousands of meals each day. Every member of the crew played an essential role in keeping the floating city alive. At exactly noon, Titanic's powerful whistles echoed across Southampton. Slowly, she began to leave the dock. But only minutes into her journey, disaster almost struck. As Titanic passed another ship called the New York, the enormous displacement of water created by her massive hull pulled the smaller vessel toward her. Mooring ropes snapped under the strain. The drifting ship headed directly toward Titanic. For a few tense moments, a collision seemed inevitable. Tugboats raced into action. Captain Smith ordered the engines reversed. At the last possible moment, the two ships missed each other by only a few feet. Many later remembered the incident as a chilling omen. At the time, however, it was dismissed as nothing more than an unfortunate accident. That evening, Titanic reached Cherbourg, France. The harbor was too small for such a massive ship. Instead of docking, she anchored offshore. Smaller boats ferried passengers and mail to the waiting liner. Among those boarding were some of Europe's wealthiest businessmen and socialites. As darkness settled over the English Channel, Titanic continued westward toward her final European stop. On the morning of April 11th, Titanic arrived at Queenstown, Ireland. Today, the town is known as Cove. Hundreds of third-class passengers boarded here. Many were immigrants leaving Ireland forever. They carried little more than small bags, family photographs, and dreams of a better future across the Atlantic. As the ship slowly departed, families on shore waved until Titanic disappeared over the horizon. Few realized it would be the last time they would ever see their loved ones. Life aboard Titanic quickly settled into a comfortable routine. First-class passengers enjoyed elaborate meals served on fine china beneath glittering chandeliers. Gentlemen relaxed in luxurious smoking rooms. Ladies gathered for afternoon tea. Children explored the ship with endless curiosity. Second-class passengers enjoyed accommodations that rivaled first class on many other ships. Even third-class travelers experienced conditions far superior to those found on most Atlantic crossings of the time. Music echoed through the corridors. Laughter filled the decks. To those on board, the voyage felt almost perfect. Day after day, Titanic steamed westward at nearly full speed. The weather remained calm. The sea was unusually smooth. Passengers spent their days walking the promenade decks, reading, playing cards, or simply admiring the endless Atlantic. Beneath the peaceful surface, the ship's engines worked around the clock. Everything appeared to be going exactly as planned. But far ahead, the North Atlantic was hiding a dangerous secret. Other ships had begun reporting unusually large fields of sea ice drifting south. Wireless operators aboard Titanic received message after message warning of icebergs directly along the planned route. The reports reached the bridge. Yet the weather remained beautiful. Visibility was excellent. There seemed to be no immediate cause for alarm. As April 14th began, Titanic continued confidently toward New York. The passengers celebrated another peaceful day at sea, unaware that somewhere ahead, in the darkness of the North Atlantic, an iceberg drifted silently across their path. Sunday, April 14th, 1912. The fourth day of Titanic's maiden voyage began peacefully. The Atlantic was unusually calm. There were no towering waves, no violent storms, no signs that the greatest maritime disaster of its time was only hours away. For the passengers, it was just another beautiful day at sea. In first class, breakfast was served on fine china beneath sparkling chandeliers. Gentlemen read newspapers while ladies gathered for conversation and afternoon tea. In third class, families shared meals, sang songs, and dreamed of the new lives awaiting them in America. The ship felt alive. Every hallway echoed with footsteps, every dining room with conversation, every deck with laughter. No one imagined these ordinary moments would soon become their final memories. Throughout the day, wireless operators received message after message from ships farther west. They all carried the same warning. Ice. Large icebergs had drifted unusually far south, directly into Titanic's path. Some warnings reached Captain Edward Smith. Others were placed on the bridge for officers to review. But the wireless room was overwhelmed with passenger telegrams waiting to be sent to the mainland. Not every warning received the same level of attention. As evening approached, the temperature began to fall. The ocean became strangely calm, so calm that experienced sailors grew uneasy. Normally, waves breaking against the base of an iceberg made them easier to spot. But tonight, the sea was almost perfectly still, without waves. An iceberg could remain nearly invisible until it was dangerously close. At approximately 10:55 p.m., the nearby steamship Californian stopped for the night after encountering heavy pack ice. Its wireless operator attempted to warn Titanic. The message was urgent. "We are stopped and surrounded by ice." But Titanic's wireless operator, Jack Phillips, was busy transmitting passenger messages to Cape Race. Frustrated by the interruption, he replied sharply, "Keep out. I am working Cape Race." The Californian's operator shut down his wireless equipment and went to bed. The final warning was never delivered to the bridge. High above the deck, two lookouts stood watch in the crow's nest, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee. The night was bitterly cold. There was no moon, only countless stars reflected across the calm Atlantic. Without binoculars, never supplied to the lookouts, they relied entirely on their eyesight. Somewhere ahead, an enormous iceberg drifted silently through the darkness. Then, at 11:40 p.m., Frederick Fleet saw it, a dark shape directly ahead, growing larger with every passing second. He struck the warning bell. 3 sharp rings. The signal every sailor feared. Iceberg. Dead ahead. On the bridge. First Officer William Murdoch reacted immediately. Hard to starboard. The helmsman spun the wheel as quickly as he could. Murdoch also ordered the engines reversed. Titanic began turning. But a ship of her enormous size could not change course instantly. Every second mattered. At 11:40 p.m., Titanic brushed against the iceberg. There was no massive explosion, no dramatic crash. Instead, a long grinding sound echoed beneath the ship. Many passengers felt only a gentle vibration. Some continued reading. Others barely looked up from their conversations. Few realized the collision had opened the ship to the sea. Below deck, the situation was far worse. The iceberg had sliced open the starboard side of the hull. 6 of Titanic's forward watertight compartments were now flooding. The ship had been designed to survive damage to 4 compartments, perhaps even 5, but not 6. Seawater rushed inside at an unstoppable rate. The disaster had already become inevitable. Shipbuilder Thomas Andrews quickly inspected the damage. After only a few minutes, he returned to Captain Smith with devastating news. Titanic could not be saved. As the bow continued filling with water, the ship would gradually sink. Andrews estimated they had perhaps 2 hours, maybe a little more. The captain stood silently. Then he gave the order no one ever wanted to hear. Prepare the lifeboats. At first, many passengers refused to believe the ship was in danger. After all, this was Titanic, the magnificent ocean liner many believed was practically unsinkable. Some laughed as they stepped onto the cold deck. Others wrapped themselves in blankets, wondering why they had been awakened. But below their feet, the freezing Atlantic continued to pour into the ship. Time was running out, and before the night was over, hundreds of lives would depend on decisions made in the next few minutes. Just after midnight on April 15, 1912, Captain Edward Smith gave the order that confirmed everyone's worst fear. Prepare the lifeboats. The crew rushed to their emergency stations. Canvas covers were removed. Ropes were checked. Lifeboats were swung out over the side. Yet many passengers still didn't believe the ship was sinking. The decks were level. The engines had only recently stopped. And inside the ship, electric lights still burned brightly. To many, abandoning Titanic seemed more dangerous than staying aboard. Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats. Together, they could hold about 1,178 people. But more than 2,200 passengers and crew were aboard. Even if every lifeboat left completely full, more than 1,000 people would still have been left behind. At the time, maritime regulations based lifeboat requirements on a ship's tonnage, not on the total number of people aboard. Titanic technically exceeded the legal requirement, yet the regulations had failed to keep pace with the size of modern ocean liners. The result was a tragic mismatch between the law and reality. Officers began loading the boats under the long-standing maritime tradition of women and children first. But confusion spread quickly. Few passengers understood how serious the situation really was. Some refused to leave their husbands. Others hesitated to climb into small wooden boats suspended high above the dark ocean. As a result, several of the first lifeboats were lowered only half full. Precious seats that could have saved lives disappeared into the darkness. Deep inside Titanic, the flooding continued relentlessly. Compartment after compartment filled with icy seawater. The bow sank lower. Water spilled over the tops of the watertight bulkheads, flooding the next compartments in a deadly chain reaction. The very system designed to save the ship could no longer stop what had begun. Titanic was slowly dying. Amid the growing panic, 8 musicians gathered on deck. Led by bandmaster Wallace Hartley, they continued to play. Their music helped calm frightened passengers. It gave people something familiar to hold on to in the middle of unimaginable uncertainty. To this day, the exact final song remains uncertain. But eyewitnesses agreed on one thing. The band kept playing until they could play no more. None of the musicians survived. In the wireless room, operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride worked without stopping. They sent urgent distress calls across the Atlantic. First came the traditional signal, CQD, then one of the newest distress calls, SOS. Their messages reached several nearby ships. Among them was the Carpathia, commanded by Captain Arthur Rostron. Nearly 60 miles away, Rostron immediately ordered his ship toward Titanic at full speed. It would become a desperate race against time. By now, Titanic's bow had sunk noticeably. The tilt of the deck became impossible to ignore. Panic spread through the remaining passengers. Some desperately searched for loved ones. Others rushed toward the last available boats. Crew members worked tirelessly to maintain order. Some would give up their own chance of survival to help strangers. Others remained at their posts until the very end. Just after 2 a.m., the bow disappeared beneath the surface. Water surged through the ship with incredible force. Furniture crashed through hallways. Glass shattered. The lights flickered. Then suddenly, darkness. The stern rose higher into the freezing night sky. For a few terrifying moments, Titanic stood almost upright. The enormous stress proved too much. The ship broke apart. One section disappeared beneath the sea. The remaining stern floated briefly before making its final plunge into the Atlantic. At 2:20 a.m., Titanic was gone. In her place remained only darkness, floating wreckage, and hundreds of people struggling in water colder than -2 degrees Celsius. Most would survive only minutes before hypothermia claimed their lives. Survivors in the lifeboats listened helplessly as desperate cries echoed across the silent ocean. One by one, those voices faded away. Shortly after dawn, the RMS Carpathia arrived at the disaster site. It rescued 705 survivors. More than 1,500 people had lost their lives. The tragedy shocked the world. In the months that followed, international investigations transformed maritime safety. Ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Continuous radio watches became mandatory, and the International Ice Patrol was established to monitor dangerous ice in the North Atlantic. More than a century later, Titanic still rests nearly 3,800 meters beneath the ocean surface, not simply as the wreck of a ship, but as a lasting reminder of ambition, innovation, human courage, and the cost of believing that anything built by human hands could ever be truly unsinkable. Thank you for watching the video. Enjoy the rest of your day.